Hi there guys, in today's video I want to show you how I made this scale model of the Orca boat from the 1975 Steven Spielberg movie, Jaws. This model is a mixture of FDM and resin printed parts, along with a lot of handcrafted elements. I downloaded the main hull file from Thingiverse. A big thank you to the user Orca Jaws Boat for this free file. I'll link your design in the description box below. The main hull and the top deck were printed on my old Elegoo Neptune 2 FDM printer. I scaled the file up to the size I wanted, but had to split it into 5 smaller sections using Slicer, in order for it to fit onto the print bed. Once all the sections were printed, I welded them together using a soldering iron, then covered the entire thing in wood filler, which was sanded back to get rid of the layer lines. I then covered the entire model in a thick yellow primer that is designed to fill gaps in plastic. As the hull sections were hollow, I filled them with plaster of Paris, which added quite a bit of weight to the model. I used cheap wooden craft sticks, which I cut to size to make the decking, and then it was on to designing a base. I designed the base using Tinkercad, a free online modelling software from Autodesk. I printed the support pegs for the boat, and quickly printed out the rest of the base in low quality. The reason for this is because I planned to make a solid base from MDF wood. The poorly printed version was just for size reference. I glued 2 sheets of MDF together to form the base and cut out 3 slots for the support pegs. I then added a border to make the edges neater. The base for the Orca would not be complete without a rather large shark swimming around on it. So I found this shark model on Cults 3D, cut the piece I needed using Slicer, and added that to the base as well. After I painted the sides of the base gloss black, it was time to create a water effect. This was achieved by covering the base with ready mixed wall filler and dabbing it with crumpled metal foil. I then added 3 shades of blue paint and covered the water effect with several gloss clear coats. I also wanted the iconic Jaws logo on the side of the base, so I printed this out, filled the gaps with wood filler, sanded it back, and painted it. With the base complete, I drilled a hole for where the mast would later be glued in place. Unfortunately, the vertical support beams for the cabin did not print correctly, and although I wanted a hollow cabin with an interior, it was going to be too difficult to do at this scale. So I decided to sculpt the cabin by hand, using foam blocks for the bulk of it, craft sticks for the vertical support beams, and filler to shape the rest of the cabin out. To ensure the windows were flat, I cut the window shapes out of plastic packaging and glued them in place. I glued some craft sticks to the top deck, but as these kept peeling away from the plastic, I also screwed them into place as well. When I started this project at the start of 2023, I didn't have a resin printer. However, this changed in June 2023 when I got my Elegoo Saturn 8K resin printer. The first detailed pieces I produced using my new printer were the 5 yellow barrels, 7 porthole windows, 2 life rings, and the steering wheel. These pieces turned out really nice, so I decided to start adding some paint to the model. I used some cheap grey primer I found as an undercoat, and then covered the entire thing with white Citadel primer. I then started masking the different sections off to layer down the red, black, and white acrylic paints. For the windows, I decided to do a couple of shades of blue as they weren't going to be transparent. It was at this point I realised the way the original cheap grey primer and the white Citadel primer had reacted caused the black paint on the bottom of the hull to crack. Although not intentional, I believe this is a really cool looking effect, as the Orca is not meant to be a brand new boat, and this paint cracking gives it some age. After cleaning up the lines and making them as sharp as I could, I used a black acrylic wash to weather the white sections. I had originally stamped the Orca sign onto the stern of the boat, but this didn't look very good, so I went back to my resin printer to make a 3D copy of this, and then began painting all the resin details I had printed so far. I used a lot of metallic Sharpie pens in this build to add some of the details, like the rivets on the steering wheel. Although I wasn't planning on adding the Orca crew to this model, I found a fantastic set of miniatures on Cults 3D. I'll link them below. I went back to the Cheeto box slicer to scale the new detail parts before printing them. These included the mast, ladder, funnel and propeller, along with the shark jaws plaque, fishing chair, and 4 bait buckets. Once the final resin detail pieces were printed, it was time to prime and paint them all. Unfortunately, the mast had bowed slightly during printing, so I cut some of the detail pieces off the main post and transferred them onto a wooden dowel to keep this piece straight. It would have been too difficult to cut the detail pieces off the top section of the mast, so it is slightly bowed, but not too noticeable. I then painted the detail pieces using a mixture of acrylic paints and metallic Sharpie pens. I'm really happy with how the shark jaws plaque and fishing chair turned out. I even added this little fin section that was missing from the bow of the boat, and filled in the gaps using Milliput 2-part epoxy. Now, I haven't printed a miniature figure in my life, so although these aren't the most detailed miniatures by far, I am happy how they turned out for a first attempt. I like the separation I was able to get between the weapons and the hands, and some of the smaller details, like the belts and shoelaces. The last few details to make were the railings that go around the yellow barrels and the bow railing. I just used some armature wire to make these, used some clamps to hold them in place while the glue dried, then I dry brushed the railings with black paint. The very final piece I made was the rudder, which I made by cutting a small piece of plastic to shape, glued it to a barbecue skewer, then painted the whole thing black. This has been one of my most detailed projects to date and the first scale model boat I have ever made. Overall, I'm really happy with how it turned out. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more projects like this in the future, then be sure to click the like button and subscribe to my channel. And be sure to check out my previous videos where I made a wearable Iron Man helmet and an archer statue from small soldiers. Thank you for watching.